Over the past 7 months, I've made 3 different videos documenting my recent playthroughs of the newly released remastered collection of the first 3 Tomb Raider games, and although I somewhat failed to make it abundantly clear in those videos, I overall really enjoyed my time playing them. However, after finishing Tomb Raider 3 a couple of months ago, I was disappointed to find that I honestly didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. I wouldn't by any means call it a bad game, but my enjoyment was nowhere near comparable to the time I spent in the first 2 outings. If you want some background on that statement, it's all in my previous video, but in simple terms, I thought it was a poorly paced game with some questionable design choices in relation to its difficulty. I'd still say there are more good maps than bad ones throughout, but while you'd expect levels in a series that has up to this point been really consistent with its design philosophy to have marginal changes in quality between the stages, I found the levels to be either really good or really bad, with little to no mediocrity in between. But that simple fact is what inspired me to make this video, and therefore give my answer to the question of what really does make a good Tomb Raider stage, at least in my opinion. I've put together a list of the different factors to think about when creating a level, as well as outlining 10 of the best stages and 6 of the weakest ones across Tomb Raider 1 through 3 Remastered, the latter I will discuss now. So to start off, here are my 10 favourite maps in no particular order of quality. I'm listing these now so that I can refer to them again when I explain some later points, and for a similar reason, here are the 6 levels that I enjoyed the least. For the sake of it, I'll mention some patterns between the stages on both of the 2 lists. Firstly, there are no entries from Tomb Raider 1 on the worst levels side, and to add to that, none of them would even be in my honourable mentions. And that's simply because I honestly don't believe there are any weak stages in said game. They're all really good. Sure, some are better than others, but there won't be much material to critique from it. Another correlation would be the lack of linearity between the best levels. All but 2 I would regard as completely non-linear, with those 2 exceptions being Temple of Xian and to a certain extent Lud's Gate. If you aren't familiar with what I mean by linear in this context, it essentially means that the structure of the map follows a path of simply passing on from one area to the next, with not much looping back on yourself. You'll probably get sick of hearing this term from me, but I find it to be of substantial importance in a lot of these points. Individually, I'd honestly say that I prefer non-linear structured levels, but this leads me on to my first point, that being the need for variety when it comes to this. I can't really use any level as an example of either praise or criticism for this point, but the reason why I found TR3 to be slow and poorly paced was because there were barely any straightforward stages at all. Non-linearity is something that defines Tomb Raider, and I'd argue that most fans actually have their favourite stage as a non-linear one, but that doesn't mean there should be disregard for simple sections. For me, it's about balance. In some non-linear levels, you feel like you're making no progress for hours on end, but linear ones give you a break. That's why it's so important to place them periodically throughout the game. but not put too much emphasis on them because it might fundamentally change the design formula to a potential loss. Tomb Raider 2 mastered this balance in my opinion. If you pay attention, you'll notice that the level order alternates between non-linear and linear styles at around a 50-50 ratio throughout the game, and it's why progression feels so fluent, yet you are still able to recall times where you had to do tasks which required you to explore large areas. Another thing that brings the pacing of some of these levels to a crawl is confusing level layouts. This is only really an issue with non-linear levels, but I think Aldwych from Tomb Raider 3 is the best example to use in order to explain this in more detail. If there's one thing that complicated layouts contribute towards the player doing a lot of, it is without question aimless running around. And those 3 words alone may possibly be my biggest gripe with this whole franchise. To use another example of St. Francis Folly from the first game, there are many things Aldwych could learn from it. There's a big vertical room which allows you to see every door, switch and item within it. The 4 keyholes and massive door at the bottom outline a clear objective early on, with the colours on both the keyholes and the levers also being a really nice touch, and upon completing the individual trial rooms, you always end up in the same central area, which makes the whole place feel interconnected. Now with Aldwych, I have to admit that on repeat playthroughs it became one of my favourite levels in Tomb Raider 3 because there's a lot of stuff it does right, but I will never forget my first completion of it because it was absolute torture. Right from the start, there's no clear aim, no smaller objectives or visual guidance to help you reach an aim, and the cutscene doesn't provide any contextual information for what you're initially meant to do either. So you're in an abandoned underground station and have no idea where to go. There are so many objectives in this level, it's not even funny, and every path has more branching paths, meaning the layout is just an unintuitive mess. There are countless instances in this level where you're required to do something on one side of the map before then having to subsequently do another thing on the other side without ever being implicitly told to do so. There are other times where you enter a room, feel like you've done what you need to do in it, and then leave, before finding out that 30 minutes later you were meant to go back as something in that room happened without you knowing. If you run on some of the train tracks at the beginning of the level, you end up dying, but one of the tracks requires you to run on it 4 times in order to access a secret room, and because the layout is so complicated, it's difficult to remember which tracks kill Lara and what platform the safe one is located at. This level had so much potential, but the only reason it isn't regarded as one of the best Tomb Raider stages of all time is because it's so difficult to navigate. This is honestly a textbook example of how to confuse the player for all the wrong reasons. Some of my favourite Tomb Raider traps are the sandbags that fall from the ceiling in Tomb Raider 2's Venetian Opera House. You're punished for not being attentive, the sandbags are always within the player's field of vision, and they're a really nice thematical touch for such a derelict environment. Every time you get killed by a sandbag in the Opera House, you feel mad at yourself for not being quick enough to avoid it, and most importantly, they feel fair. Another set of great traps are the swinging blades in Tomb Raider 1's City of Vilcabamba. I like how these are introduced early on into the game, and although the player will most likely die to them upon the first encounter, there's a save point right before, and the tile that activates the trap is clearly marked. You're also free to take your time when going down the corridor, meaning dodging the axes is down to the player's skill and timing rather than being reliant on their prior knowledge gained from dying to the trap before. Also, because it's the second level of the game, the developers were kind enough to add water beneath the trapdoor for Lara to land in it safely. It would be a shame if they put an instant kill hazard there instead. When you play these games, you'll start to notice that a lot of the traps rely on trial and error, with the only method of getting past them being to have already died to them once, therefore giving you knowledge on what to do when you come across them the second time. Take this corridor at the end of Natla's mines. Is there any indication that the boulder is going to roll down this corridor and kill you? No. How about when random pieces of rock fall from the ceiling onto Lara? No. When a bridge just randomly collapses while you're standing on it, causing you to fall into lava? Also no. Does this random dune of sand look dangerous to stand on? No. When you press a button that looks like it's required to be pressed in order to complete the level, only for the floor beneath you to ignite, causing you to burn to death, does it feel like it's your own fault? Definitely not. I honestly don't understand what the point of having these traps is. Not only does it legitimately piss you off when you die, especially when you last saved 15 minutes ago, but you also don't feel any sense of accomplishment after getting past them because you haven't actually used any of your skill to do so. Instead, you're left questioning what the developers were thinking when they added these traps into the game, because surely you wouldn't want your players to feel annoyed at the people who made it. Some of these traps are genuinely unfair and are designed to be that way. As a game developer, going out of your way to make the player's time insufferable at no fault of their own is objectively bad game design. End of story. Traps are good inclusion in the majority of circumstances, but use them wisely, and with the player's enjoyment being prioritized. The fact that some levels get away with doing this is concerning to say the least. When a puzzle is completed or you do some other task that allows you to progress, you as the player should feel proud of yourself and your actions, but sometimes the path forward is obscure and cryptic to the point where no human could possibly work out a solution without coincidence or trial and error. These puzzles don't make you feel like your skills are developing, they make you feel cheated. Take this section in Old Witch, I swear to god this level is so confusing, where you have to pick up a random coin off the floor. How the hell are you meant to know that you're supposed to just stand in front of this specific ticket booth and use the coin? All the other ticket booths look the same, but only this one works, not to mention that none of them look even the slightest bit interactable in the first place. In Tomb Raider 3's Antarctica level, there's a part where you have to turn the wheel on two of these four water pipes, but if you turn the wrong ones, it won't work. So how are you meant to know which two are the right ones? A random picture in a cabin on the other side of the map. In the Venice stage, you need to press a switch to open a door on the other side of the level, and then race in a motorboat against a timer to go through the door before it closes. It is literally impossible to get there in time without using the boost button, but you're never actually told the boat has a boost button. It's not really a puzzle, but it still annoys me. None of these puzzles have any method or require you to do any thinking whatsoever. It's completely subjective as to whether or not you can do them first try. Now compare this with a really good puzzle, the Palace Midas Switch one, where it's superior simply because the hint is less cryptic. You have to use these 5 levers in different combinations to open doors around the room, with the codes for the switches being listed on the doors. In my TR1 video I mentioned that the codes didn't really correlate with the position the switch should be in. I think maybe some simple arrows on the doors would work a little bit better, but I can forgive it. Behind 3 of the 4 doors is a lead bar, which are all required to be picked up in order to exit the area. The 4th and final door contains 3 different receptacles, but the lead bars won't go in them in their current form. Instead, both the image in said room and the name of the level function as the hint. And this might be my favourite standalone puzzle in the entire game. So make puzzles intuitive and not obscure, and focus on utilising the knowledge that the player is likely to have and not your own. Adding this to both linear and non-linear levels helps to make environments feel like they have much more depth, and makes the player feel more immersed. It's been done on numerous occasions throughout the series, but my favourite instance of it has to be in, unpopularly, Ludd's Gate, which is one of my favourite levels in Tomb Raider 3. Near the beginning of this stage, you can choose to come across this large mezzanine area, which overlooks some sort of sewage room. You know that you're going to end up in this room at some point, but you can't access it for the time being. Later on in the stage, you swim through a corridor and find yourself in that same room, although it takes you a second to realise where you actually are. It makes you feel like you've made a lot of progress towards your goal, and this isn't actually the only time it happens in this level. I can completely understand if you couldn't care less for this type of thing in a stage, but it's important in regards to making it feel more complete in my opinion. Of course, this isn't the only example I can think of in the remastered collection that executes this feeling well, but I think Ludd's Gate has the best interpretation of it because of how many times it happens. The level usually takes around 2 hours to complete and has countless different areas and side rooms, yet every part of the map is actually directly adjacent to or in close proximity with another part, although you wouldn't initially know this, as the level is designed to be traversed in a completely different order. Malibu Gorge is another level that executes this really well. Descending down the waterfalls on the kayak before platforming through previously explored areas you didn't know you realistically could is always a great time. Temple Ruins in Tomb Raider 3's India chapter is one of my least favourite levels in the game, and the only reason for that is because every single wall, ceiling and floor looks the same. I'm going to try and keep this point and the following ones quite short as I don't have much to say about them, but this is such an easy problem to fix, yet it can ruin a stage if it's present. Temple Ruins is the second stage in this game, yet I honestly think it's the most difficult to navigate in the entire collection. It's not as big as other levels in terms of size and number of rooms, but it's so easy to get lost. While playing this stage, you are constantly asking yourself about whether or not you have been in a room before, whether or not you need to go in a room, or where another room was located. Everything looks the same and it completely butchers the experience for me. I know a lot of people say that this is one of their favourite TR maps of all time, but personally I never enjoy my time with it. Although it wasn't in my list of the 10 best levels, I'm going to use caves to talk about this next point, that being the opening of a stage, or in this case, franchise. Caves is the opening of Tomb Raider 1, and although some may view it as insignificant among other more complex levels, I think it's really good for what it is, with many memorable parts and introductions to mechanics. The start of this level is really strong, and just looking at this one image makes you curious. A clear straight path, but with a black void in front of you which covers up the foreboding distance. There are some nice thematic touches such as the atmospheric sound effects and the footprints in the snow. Everything just seems to be designed to make you want to go further into the cave, but not without the essence of danger. Now you compare this with the opening of Thames Wharf, another London level from Tomb Raider 3, aka one-on-one on how not to start your level. If you watched my last video, you'd know that I didn't have the greatest time with this one. Environmentally, I think it's boring and generic. I know that's a bit subjective, but if you look at how other urban-themed chapters like Venice, VCI or Paris from Angel of Darkness opened, I can't feel anything but underwhelmed. While Caves among other levels had a clear straight path or established some sort of goal early on, this level just throws Lara on top of some building and expects the player to know which direction to start going in. As there are a lot of objectives to complete here, and because if you don't do them in the right order it means you have to climb back up to the top multiple times, it means the opening of this level is super arduous, especially on a first playthrough. Sanctuary of the Scion has been one of my favourite Tomb Raider maps ever since I first played it. I think it has one of the most awe-inspiring set pieces ever made, and the music, camera angles and fog all add to that. This will be my shortest point, as from just looking at this footage you can see the amount of effort that went into creating this structure, but I thought I'd mention it anyway, even when it's painfully obvious. The fact that your main task in this level consists of platforming around the outer walls of the caves makes it so much more immersive, and when you finally open the door at the bottom of the statue and drop down into the subterranean lake, it is honestly one of the most defining moments in the series. I believe it's common knowledge in the Tomb Raider community that a lot of the vehicles in the original game were added in after the levels had actually been built. This is wrong in many different ways, but when you combine that with awful and unreliable control systems, you get Tibetan Foothills, the worst map in Tomb Raider 2. I spent a lengthy amount of time talking about this horrible snowmobile in the video I made when the remasters launched, but I have died more times in this level than any other by a country mile. It seems to have a mind of its own, and that compiled with the insane amount of pits, you will find yourself getting more angry here than at any other point during the game. If you look at RX Tech Mines from the third game, where structurally the vehicles were implemented before the level was finalised, you can see that not only do the minecarts control a lot better, but the tracks all loop back to the same room, which also functions as a way to stop the player from getting disoriented or lost. This is one of the few times where in this series I can say that a stage benefits from having vehicles in it, as a lot of the time they most certainly don't. Tomb Raider 2's finale is really good. It's a 2-hour-long gauntlet of traps with a fun boss battle at the end. The part has atmosphere, variety of locales, and some fantastic narrative, which is the subject of this point. There are no lines of dialogue throughout the end of TR2, and yet it still manages to tell the best story in the classic series during gameplay. At the start, you see the end, that being the item Lara has been looking for throughout the whole game, Unfortunately, a trapdoor opens up beneath you and it leads to a very long fall, and the length of said fall tells the player exactly how hard this part of the game is going to be, because you know it's going to be a long journey to get back to the top. It's such a well executed moment that is so fun to go through every time, and from a gameplay perspective the rest of the level is phenomenal. The rest of the chapter also takes pride in its narrative presentation, but I won't spoil too much in this video. To put it in simple terms, narrative may not be something that fundamentally changes a level by foundation or design, but it's a small addition that can elevate a level's enjoyment by more than you would believe. Tomb Raider 1's Obelisk of Khamun features my favourite combat encounter in the whole series. It does everything correctly, and I think most levels should have at least one of these moments. You enter this creepy dark room from a high up platform. The darkness and, weirdly enough, the furniture make you feel like something is down there. And surely enough there is. If you touch the floor, some music starts playing and two monsters appear. Really good moment, but it's a shame that you can skip it by using a cheat method. The previously mentioned RX Tech Mines also has a moment like this, which is again really good. However, if you watch my TR2 video, you'd know there is one level where the combat ruins the entire thing. And of course I'm talking about Living Quarters. This level has no depth within its combat. It constantly spams gun enemies in small rooms, meaning you're forced to tank damage, and unfortunately this highlights a broader issue with Tomb Raider 2's gunplay. Now there's one level from the lists I outlined at the start of the video that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's actually the level that follows Living Quarters chronologically, the Deck, and in my opinion, the best Tomb Raider level ever made. Across each of the 10 points, this level exceeds the bar for every single one of them. It has a memorable layout structured with verticality, no unpredictable or unfair traps, no cryptic puzzles, different vantage points which interlink with different larger areas, a foreboding atmosphere, unrivaled combat, a fantastic opening, narrative, no stupid vehicles, and has an emphasis on exploration. I could honestly make a separate video discussing how awesome this level is, but I can't relate to one specific point, because I would not know where to start. I thought this might be a bit of a weird but original idea, and I tried really hard to put the longer points near the start of the video. I expect most of the people watching this, even though there's probably none, to completely object to most of the things I've mentioned, and I'd love to hear what some of you would have to say in the comments section about it. I'll probably just carry on with the review videos for the future, as this was meant to be just a one-off style of video, but if it sees some level of success, I'll probably make another one in the future, but nonetheless I'll try and follow this up fairly soon.